The title here says Starlink's trillion-dollar opportunity, and that's not hyperbole. So if you're somebody that owns space stocks or is thinking about owning space stocks, then you're going to want to watch this presentation because it not only talks about the vast opportunity in front of Starlink, but also how they plan to potentially displace a lot of the smaller new space stocks that have gone public using special purpose acquisition companies. So I wanted to talk briefly about the elephant in the room, and we all know who that is. Here at Nanalyze, we strictly avoid getting into political discourse, and we're going to keep it that way. So this isn't about Mr. Musk, and this wasn't prompted by his latest shenanigans. This is a presentation that's being given because the topic of space stocks has come up in our portfolio construction, and we wanted to address that. Now, before we start talking about our portfolio, there's a little red subscribe button in the bottom corner of the screen here. Please click that and subscribe if you like forums where politics discussions aren't allowed and everybody is welcome. So this is a picture of our current 38 tech stock portfolio, and we've broken down stocks by size, and we'll look at size buckets in a second. But I wanted to talk about the category weightings here, and you can see that we're overweight AI and life sciences, IoT, but we're dramatically underweight space and cannabis. So cannabis is something that we've invested in just to have a dog in the race. We don't plan to increase that allocation by much, but as a matter of fact, you're going to want to watch our recent presentation on cannabis in regards to that. But the topic of space came up, so we have some money allocated towards space stocks, but not very much. And the question is, do we want to increase that? And thus the topic of Starlink came up. Now, when we look at size allocations, you can see here these buckets that we've constructed. Our optimal place where we'd like most of our money to be is in the large bucket, $10 billion to $100 billion. A lot of these space SPACs are quite small. And if let's say SpaceX were to go public, it would probably be valued above $100 billion, and that's certainly not in our sweet spot. That's where we like to begin harvesting gains. Now, we have a tech stock catalog that contains 460 different tech stocks, and one of those categories is space. I simply filtered on the space category here, and I filtered on the SPAC flag, and you can see here the notes. We have short notes for every single one of these companies. We also have a status that says whether we love the stock, which means we own it, we like it, we're thinking about owning it, or we're avoiding it. And you can see that with the exception of Planet Labs and Rocket Lab, we're avoiding all these names. And the question came up, well, are there any space stocks out there that we ought to consider, or would we even consider allocating more money to this particular theme? Now, Starlink, we believe, poses a threat to a lot of these companies and is probably going to be the dominant player when it comes to space stocks that you'll want to own. The problem is that it's not yet publicly traded. So here's a picture of Starlink's connectivity, and they've launched a whole bunch of satellites to offer cheap internet bandwidth. That's the basic thesis. Here you can see the availability map, and along the top there you can see residential offerings. That's home broadband, business broadband, RVs for people on the move. That's quite popular in the States, maritime and aviation, along with IoT, and we're going to talk about that. Now, we need to separate SpaceX versus Starlink. SpaceX is the company that launches rockets. Elon Musk used first principles thinking to completely redesign the idea of launching things into space. He reduced launch costs by 90% using reusable rockets. That reusability component is critical, and it's something that's posing quite the barrier to entry for firms like Rocket Lab that are trying to catch rockets using helicopters, and recently, I believe, said they don't think that's going to be possible, and they're going to design reusability into the next version of their rocket. What this does is it reduces costs of goods sold by 90% so that SpaceX can compete on cost with every other company out there that's doing launches. So SpaceX having an IPO, those speculations aren't really in focus. However, there's a lot of talk about Starlink. That's the subsidiary of SpaceX that's launching all those satellites into space with cheap bandwidth, that they potentially may have an IPO to unlock value for SpaceX. Now, there are numerous pieces out there talking about why Elon Musk might not have a IPO for SpaceX, but there is indeed some commentary from the man about potentially spinning off Starlink as a public company by 2025, especially given that's a consumer brand that could be beneficial way to for some free marketing. So he had apparently told employees that an IPO of Starlink was unlikely until 2025 or later, and he said that earlier this year. Now, he had also said in 2019 that breaking Starlink off as an IPO could happen this year. So it's a moving target, and you can't really count on any sort of those speculations. But what's interesting is that if you look at an investment vehicle called Bailey Gifford U.S. Growth Trust, here you can see that the investments they've been making in SpaceX and the corresponding valuations. Very cool. So we can see that 5.7% of their assets are in SpaceX stock, and you can see the value of that increasing nearly double from 2021. So this is a nice way to have a peek into SpaceX's increasing valuation over time, though as we've written about, and I'll include a link to that article in the description of this video, this probably isn't a viable way to get exposure to SpaceX because that 6% is quite small. It's a fund, so when they sell it, it's not like they're giving that money to their shareholders. It's managed differently, but certainly this is a fund that's quite interesting. So let's talk a little bit about Starlink. Again, what this presentation is about. They used first principles thinking to build satellites with a 5-year lifespan. They've launched over 3,500 of these, up to 42,000 may be launched. The superior barrier to entry here would be cheap launch costs from SpaceX. They're going to be a global internet services provider, an enabler of IoT connectivity, which we'll talk about, and a provider of dirt cheap bandwidth. How cheap? Well, several years back, we wrote this piece on the global impact of cheap satellites and launches, and I'll put a link to it in the description. It's well worth a read. This gentleman, his name is Mr. Hamden, he had put together a very long research piece on this thesis, with a lot of great data that we mined, and here were some of the key talking points. So while satellite internet has been around for quite a long time, what Starlink is offering is quite cheaper than anything that we've ever seen. So Mr. Hamden puts time to revenue for a single Starlink satellite costing $100K to 1 week, assuming a subscriber cost of $1 per gigabyte. So a Starlink satellite can deliver 30 petabytes of data over its lifetime at an amortized cost of 0.003 cents per gigabyte. That's 8 times cheaper than undersea cables, and SpaceX thinks that's 17 times cheaper than OneWeb's planned constellation of 600 satellites. So this very cheap bandwidth is the fundamental value proposition of Starlink. So what makes it a $1 trillion opportunity? There's only a few $1 trillion industries in existence. You have energy, chemicals, IT, healthcare, agriculture, things like that. So if we just look at the world's population, that may not be a $1 trillion opportunity. So there's 1 billion people in developed markets. If we captured half that at $50 a month, that's $300 billion. Or if we went to emerging markets, 6 billion people in emerging markets. We captured a quarter of that at $5 a month. That would be $90 billion. So we're not even at $400 billion. But what about connecting all the world's corporations or all the world's devices? So ARM predicts 1 trillion IoT devices by 2035. And this slide here shows you just how big the IoT market will be by 2030. And what Starlink is planning for IoT is quite interesting, and it's something that we wrote about a while back, and it involves this company called Swarm that SpaceX acquires. And when you think about Mr. First Principles thinking, acquiring a company, that's pretty notable considering that he believes in building everything from the ground up. So what they have, the technology they built, must be quite solid. The woman in this picture, Dr. Sarah Spangelo, I'm probably butchering that, is holding the smallest commercially operational satellite in space, which weighs 14 ounces or 400 grams. That allows low-cost two-way global satellite connectivity for IoT devices with data plans starting at $5 a month. Again, extremely cheap. They were planning to launch a 150 satellite constellation before they were bought by SpaceX. So nearly 90% of the Earth's surface doesn't have cell or Wi-Fi connectivity, and there's lots of places that we'd like to have connectivity that could be useful. I'll give you an example of a use case. Firm called Dryad. What they're doing is they're putting out these sensors in forests that can detect forest fires. Did you know the amount of carbon dioxide put off by forest fires dwarfs what cars put off? So if you add up all the land that burns globally in an average year, you're looking at 13 billion metric tons of additional carbon in the atmosphere out of an estimated 50 billion tons in total. So there's a huge opportunity there that you would hope the climate activists are getting on board with and funding that and pushing for that to be deployed, because that's what we call low-hanging fruit. And do you enjoy eating? We recently wrote a piece on the coming food crisis. I'm in South Africa right now, and the most dangerous occupation in the world right now is a South African farmer. That's no joke. If you get on the ground here, you'll realize just how problematic this country is right now. But think about the ag tech use cases that could be realized using this technology that Starlink has now acquired. So there's a lot of opportunity here. Now, when we look at space stocks in our catalog and we think about how Starlink might displace them, the first category here, geospatial intelligence, that's probably going to be the safest, and we'll talk about why that is. Second category here, rockets. You've got Rocket Lab that hasn't mastered reusability, Astra Space, which isn't even worth mentioning. Then you get down to satellites. You have AST Spacemobile, interesting company, a huge cult following. And for SpaceX to have recently announced capabilities with T-Mobile for subscribers to use their cell phones to connect to satellites from Starlink is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it proves that the technology is capable, which we had doubted that it was possible for a cell phone to connect to a satellite just out of the box. Indeed, it is possible. But it also shows that Starlink is well ahead in terms of the technology. They're now deploying it, while all AST Spacemobile can do is write letters to their shareholders every 5 minutes talking about how much progress they're making with their Skywalker satellite. So certainly we wouldn't think that was good news for AST Spacemobile. Then you have Terran Orbital. Again, if you're planning to build thousands of small satellites right now and Starlink has deployed over 3,500, not a good business that we'd want to invest in. Then you've got other categories here, space tourism, Virgin Galactic, that's quite the bomb. And then you have Momentous. We called that, as the founder, as being shady from day one. Indeed, he's been indicted. Redwire, the jury is still out. We need to do some more due diligence once they've aggregated all their acquisitions. Virgin Orbit, trying to launch, I believe, things into space in the back of Boeing 747s, whatever their business model is having a hard time raising more money because they need more and they're in trouble. So when we look at satellite imagery, you could say, well, SpaceX or let's say Starlink could displace satellite imagery companies. Doesn't seem likely. Why? Because it isn't about capturing the data with cameras. So you have, digital globe imaging Earth at 30 centimeter resolution. Planet is covering every inch of the Earth 24/7. The data is there. It's all about the software and extracting value from the data, and we've spent a lot of time talking to a firm called RS Metrics and learning about this space, and we've written extensively about it. And the belief there is that it all comes down to software, and the only space stock we've invested in is Planet Labs. We'll look to cover that actually fairly soon. We'll do an update on that, a SaaS firm. But the last time we looked, things weren't so good when they have to try to convince their customers to keep using the product. Now, one thing that comes up in the context of Starlink is space junk. And this picture here is from an island in the middle of nowhere called Kwajalein. And I was fortunate enough to, one of the researchers on staff was able to wrangle me an invitation from the U.S. government to visit this island. I actually climbed up on that berm you see there in the middle right of the picture and got in trouble because you're not supposed to climb on ladders without a permit or climb above 10 feet because the space radar installation they have on this island is the most powerful radar on this planet, and it can detect objects in space the size of marbles and track them. So you can bet that SpaceX is using technology like this to make sure that their satellites stay out of harm's way. Furthermore, their plan is that once the satellite's lifetime has been complete, they plan to deorbit their satellites in order to keep space clean. So they've certainly thought that through. Now, just to conclude, space, probably the riskiest theme that we cover. We're not looking for more exposure right now because it's just too risky and there aren't very many viable firms out there. We actually like one other satellite company that we'll be writing about soon. But Starlink and SpaceX provide formidable competition for all the space stocks out there, especially the new ones that came about using SPACs. We're underweight space. We'll probably keep it that way. And just remember that if Starlink or SpaceX have an IPO, it's likely going to be hyped heavily and will require investors to have a simple valuation ratio target in advance so that you don't end up overpaying for shares. So do me a favor and just click this blue Nanalyze icon on the right, subscribe to our channel, and I put up a video here on finding the next Tesla that you might find interesting to watch next. Thanks for your time.